Hello friends, welcome back. We are discussing about the anatomy of the lungs. So this was the introduction of the lungs. Now let us discuss about the parts of the lungs. There are four main parts of the lungs. There is apex. So look here friends, in this picture you can see this is the apex of the lungs, right? So there are some important points about the apex of the lungs. What are those points? First of all, the apex of the lungs is rounded. You can see here is a little bit rounded in nature, in shapes, right? So the apex is round in shape. It is 3 to 4 centimeter above the first costal cartilage, right? This is the first costal cartilage, and the apex of the lungs is, if you take the length of the apex of the lung from the first costal cartilage, so it will be 3 to 4 centimeter above, right? And 2.5 centimeter above the clavicle bone. So our clavicle is little bit superior to the first costal cartilage, so we say the apex of the lungs is 2.5 centimeter above the clavicle bone, right? The apex is rounded, blunt, superior end of the lungs, right? So the superior end of the lungs is called the apex. It extends into the root of the neck about 3 centimeters superior to the anterior end of the first rib, right? So from the first rib, it extends into the root of the neck 3 centimeter above the first rib and 2.5 centimeter above the medial 1/3 of the clavicle bone, right? And it is covered by cervical pleura and suprapleural membrane. So the first thing about the apex that we learned. Then what are the relations of the apex of the lungs? Relations of the apex of the lungs: the anterior relations and the posterior relations. Anterior to the apex of the lungs there are subclavian artery, internal thoracic artery, and scalenus anterior muscle, right? So these three important structures are present anterior to the apex of the lungs. And what are the posterior relations? The neck of the first rib, right? And when the first rib goes back, so the neck of the first rib is present in posterior relation. Ventral ramus of the first thoracic nerve, the ventral ramus of the first thoracic nerve, the first posterior intercostal artery, the first posterior intercostal vein, and the sympathetic chain. So these are the structures which are in relation to the apex of the lungs. So the apex is rounded, and we told you about its exact location and its relations. Now we come to the base of the lungs, right? So here you can see this is the base of the lungs, right? And the base of the lungs is a little bit semilunar in shape. The base of the lungs is semilunar concave surface. You see here there is depression for the for this structure, right? For the diaphragm which enters inside it. So you can see there is a depressed part. So we say the base of the lung is semilunar concave surface. It rests on the dome of the diaphragm. It's also called the diaphragmatic surface of the lungs. It is related to liver and fundus of the stomach. So the right lung, here is the location of the liver, and towards the left lung, the base of the left lung, this is there is the location of the stomach. So you can see this is the apex, and these two are the bases of the two lungs. Now what are the relations of the base of the lung? On right side, lungs is separated from the liver by the right dome of the diaphragm, okay? So on the right side, right lung is in relation to the liver. On the left side, the lung is separated from the spleen and fundus of the stomach by the left dome of the diaphragm. Okay, so this was about the relations of the left lung, base of the left lung. Okay, so apex and base. Now what are the borders of the lung? Our lungs has three borders: the anterior border, posterior border, and inferior border. And in this diagram it will be clear, right? This is the anterior border, this is the posterior border, and inferior border. So here you can see this is the inferior border, this is the anterior border, and this is the posterior border of the lungs, right? So what about the borders? The anterior border, it is thin and shorter border than posterior. The interior border of the right lung is a little bit vertical. The interior border of the left lung presents a cardiac notch, a wide cardiac notch which is occupied by the heart and pericardium. So here the left lung, you can see the interior border of the left lung makes a cardiac notch, in which this is called heart depression or cardiac depression or cardiac notch, in which the heart or the pericardium of the heart is enclosed, right? So the anterior border is thin, shorter than posterior border. The interior border of the right lung is vertical. Below the cardiac notch, it presents a tongue-shaped projection called the lingula. So you can see it here. In the next diagram, we will see it a little bit clear, right? Okay, so these 4 points were about the anterior border. Now, what about the posterior border? It's a little bit thick and rounded. It extends from the spine of C3 vertebra to the spine of the T10 vertebra. So this is the location of the posterior border. Okay, what about the inferior border? Inferior border is semilunar in shape and separates the costal and medial surfaces, right? So this is the costal surface and this is the medial surface. Here is the inferior border. So we discussed about the apex, about the base, and about the borders of the lungs. The next lecture we will discuss about the surfaces and the relations of the surfaces of the lungs. See you guys there.